On Friday, Minister Pravin Gordhan restructured the board of state power utility Eskom, naming Mr. Mpho Makwana as its new chairman as the government seeks solutions to the country's worsening energy crisis and its impact on the economy. Mandy Rambharos, the head of Eskom's energy transition department, has resigned as negotiations with some of the world's wealthiest nations to secure some $8.5 billion in climate finance for South Africa became complicated. Let's find out what all this means. We're joined now by Ted Blom, an energy analyst. Ted, good morning to you, and thank you very much for availing yourself. I don't think we've gotten your perspective as yet on the appointment of the new board.
Okay, so yes, I think it's still early days, but I would have liked the minister to just indicate what sort of portfolios he considered when he made those appointments to the board. Because it's not that clear. I mean, there are 3 engineers and I think 3 accountants and 1 or 2 lawyers. But at the end of the day, Eskom's a very complicated organization, and it would have been useful if, in the first instance, the people should have been given a sort of a designated area to have a look at, given that Eskom's in crisis mode. Secondly, I think that the way that the board is structured with the non-executive directors and only 2 representatives from the executive, the CEO and the finance so-called director, I think that's inadequate for where we are at the moment. I would have at least expected the head of engineering to also be there so that he can explain to the board and those engineers on the board exactly what the engineering complications are within Eskom and why we can't get our EAF up to the 75% that the minister touted, or even higher, where it previously was up, the highest I think was in the 90s. So hopefully there is some resolution, and hopefully some comments from the public will be taken to heart. And just a message for the CEO: we're not all armchair critics. Some of us actually have real experience on the ground, and to the extent that we've also got people informing us of what's going on the ground. So we make our comments advisedly. We don't just make a lot of noise.
When you speak of people informing you of what is happening on the ground, the Public Enterprises Minister, noting on Friday that there's sabotage, and this is something that we have heard before. There's a deliberate attempt to frustrate operations at Eskom as well. When it comes to that, what is it that you are hearing? Because he's also called for the arm of law enforcement to reach or stretch its hand and assist at Eskom.
Okay, so I mean, Eskom has made these sensational allegations previously, and it seems to me after due investigation, those were a lot of hot air from Eskom's side. I no doubt, from the information that I've been given, there are misdemeanors taking place within Eskom, and it's tried as to whether you categorize them as mismanagement or incompetence or deliberate sabotage, so to speak. But it's not of the sensational type that the CEO and the minister seem to like referring to. The stuff I'm referring to is when I was previously at Eskom, I was part of boards or tender boards where we authorized the installation of, for instance, condition monitoring equipment so that we can dynamically see when stuff is going to break down or not operating optimally. However, a lot of that stuff has been removed, and I believe the allegation is that they were removed so that the stuff can blow up and that then the employees can get kickbacks from the equipment suppliers to replace the equipment that needlessly has now become broken. So there is mismanagement, and there are misdemeanors certainly. Whether you want to categorize them sensationally as sabotage, that's I suppose each one's personal preference. But there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done on the ground, and it seems to me there's a major disconnect between what's going on at the stations and what's being adjudicated and decided at head office.
As we are still digesting what is happening with 3 weeks of consistent high stages of load shedding, the new composition of the board at Eskom, the Sunday Times today reporting that on a random Friday, Andre Director was cleaning his car and unbeknown to him, there was a sophisticated bug that was in that car. And so I do wonder if you've had a chance to formulate an opinion on what we should read into this, right?
Yeah, I saw that article late last night. I think it's disturbing in two instances. Firstly, it's not nice to be bugged. I have personal experience of being bugged by this government over the last 10, 15 years. And secondly, Mr. De Ruyter and the so-called experts seem to allude to the fact that that was a very sophisticated bug, something that I certainly haven't come across in my limited career, but that those sophisticated bugs are typically used by the National Intelligence Agency. I'm certainly gobsmacked by hearing all this. So if I put two and two together, or as the minister said, I join the dots, it seems to me that there's parts of our government that don't trust Mr. De Ruyter as well and want to eavesdrop on him. And that is even more disappointing, because I thought the government had full confidence in Mr. De Ruyter and his performance, and it was only detractors and armchair critics who didn't quite give him the same approval rankings. But nevertheless, it's disturbing. Eskom is a national key point, so things like that shouldn't happen at Eskom, and I'm sure Mr. De Ruyter knows where his car was in the last couple of months, so he can probably track back to when the most likely incident or occasion was, when that eavesdropping device or tracking device or whatever it is was installed in his car.
Sure. We take a look at the month of November. The North African nation of Egypt will be playing host to the COP27 climate summit. However, South Africa will be going into that summit without a head of energy transition, as Ms. Mandy Rambharos has resigned. Why?
Yeah, no, I think that's bad news for Eskom, because she certainly played a leading role from what I can see in those negotiations. I personally think it's a lot of hot air, because I'm maybe one of the detractors of the so-called climate change argument. The climate has changed for billions of years. It's going to change billions of times more. So, but nevertheless, to the extent that Eskom's committed to that sort of role to decarbonize its operations, and Mandy was allegedly the front runner in those discussions and arguments, I think this is a hangover blow for Eskom. And I don't know, to what extent they had a junior or a subordinate or a stand-in attend all these meetings with Mandy. I personally am not aware of anybody that was shadowing her. So if Eskom has to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch, that would be a very big hiccup for Eskom.
Yeah, what does that mean, right, for the country? Because a lot is said about the just energy transition.
Yeah, they made it a big focus point. I mean, to the extent that if you tie the dots once again, you've got to tie the efforts in of the so-called just energy transition, the noises that come from our cabinet, the visit of Mr. Ramaphosa to President Biden, where they also talked about accelerating the early closure of the coal fleet, and also the release of about $8 billion to help subsidize some of the leftover communities who will be stranded if the coal fleet is disbanded. So yes, I mean, it seems to me a core part of Eskom's sort of commitments and roadmap ahead. And once again, what we would have liked the board to have been adjudicated or allocated areas, and so we know who's the board member responsible for the just energy transition, given it's such a major slice of Eskom's so-called noise that they make about going forward.
Ted, I'd like to focus on what you just said. You call it the so-called just energy transition. I sense a bit of skepticism there.
Well, the reason I question it is that I come back and I'm really, people tell me last time I made these comments that I'm an old fossil. I might be an old fossil, but I like to follow facts. And the fact is that this whole decarbonization argument is driven by money and estimates and anticipations. If you go back to Mr. Gore's initial projections about 10, 15 years ago, Cape Town would have been underwater by now. And certainly when I last saw Cape Town, it wasn't underwater. In fact, it was exactly where it was when Jan van Riebeeck discovered the place. So, yes, that's why I'm a bit skeptical about the so-called needs for the just energy transition. The people need to know that there are billions, if not trillions, of dollars behind the so-called decarbonization of the world. And if we follow the same route as North America and Europe, Germany in particular, we're also going to be left high and dry without energy. And that's exactly where they were with following the just energy transition. Some quarters now we're seeing some sort of pushback, and I will certainly be part of that pushback, because I don't believe all the nonsense that we are being force-fed by, amongst others, the politicians and seemingly everybody who's on the payroll of the so-called green movement.
What then does the average South African need to do? What options are available to South Africans? Do you perceive that enough is known, or people have an understanding enough to make a decision that is in the best interest of not only this generation but the next?
No, absolutely. I think people are still in the learning curve, but and it's contaminated by people making false projections as if they're fact. And that's the part that irks me. I'm quite happy to face facts left, right, and center. I'm not scared of facing facts. When you get to my age, I'm not scared of anything, I suppose. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of this stuff is based on budgets of people who have very vested interests in decarbonizing, closing down our coal power stations so that they can sell their renewable stuff and force it down our throats like they did with some European countries. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with Minister Mantashe. There's not a lot of things that Minister Mantashe and I agree on. But certainly, on paper, Eskom has got more than adequate capacity to drive this economy. It's just they need to stop the incompetence and the corruption and the defunding of the coal fleet, because that's what's happened. The new management have defunded the maintenance program of the coal fleet. And then we can do transitions of all sorts, because coal won't last forever anyway. So sometime or other there will need to be transitions. But give it its right name. Don't try and come and paint a picture under the guise of climate change or whatever. The climate, as I said, has changed a million times, and will change millions and more times, with or without mankind. So I don't quite buy that argument that's been force-fed by the green lobby. We have very, very strong vested interests. So call me an antagonist as such if you want to, but that's where I stand.
Ted, are you suggesting that maybe then what we are seeing right now with Eskom is deliberate? You've also pointed out to a lack of competence, right, and competent people. Is that on purpose to then, move to whatever other alternative energy sources that are out there?
Well, if I may refer you, there's some videos doing the circulation on social media. One with me and Gareth Cliff, where I alluded to 3-4 years ago to the so-called secret force or hidden force or third force and the secret agenda. And the latest video that goes around was that interview of mine of 3 years ago, together with the announcement of Mr. Biden in the last 14 days, admitting that the Americans are doing everything in their power to force early closure of the coal power stations and defunding the coal power stations on the basis that being all contingent before they release the so-called new funds for the just energy transition. So it's not just Eskom with broken parts. That's only less than half of the story. It's also not just the lack of skills to fix up the coal fleet. That also could be not the full story. But now on top of that, we've got a public admission in a video link and recordal of Mr. Biden, President Biden, admitting and boasting about playing a very fingering role in the closure, the early closure of our coal fleet, and that's what's putting us in this disastrous situation of load shedding, because the coal fleet hasn't been properly maintained. On paper, they've got 52 gigawatts. We would have more than 20 gigawatts spare capacity if the people at Eskom had just had not a secret agenda and did what they were being paid a lot of money to do every single day and diligently. That hasn't happened, and that's why we're now in this predicament of stage 4 load shedding, which seems to be ongoing and there's no prospects of it being changed very soon.
Ted Blom is an energy analyst. Thank you.